Eurorack modular synthesizers are fascinating. They're typically the most expensive instrument in the room, and yet they're almost exclusively created by amateurs. I certainly don't build instruments for a living. So why do it? Yes, the most expensive instrument I own was built by an amateur. Meanwhile, there are teams of people working 60 hours a week to create the best, most mind-blowing instrument ever. So when deciding on a new direction for my Eurorack system, I had to keep this in mind. It isn't going to make sense for me to try to beat the pros at their own game. I have to balance practicality with uniqueness, with a little more emphasis on uniqueness than any commercial manufacturer could possibly get away with. I had to get in touch with my own taste in a way that wouldn't leave me alienated from the unique elements I add. I had to try over and over and over and over again. It still may not be completely done, but I'm incredibly proud of what I've made so far. So I rebuilt my Eurorack system. I loved the old way I had it set up and made a lot of music with it. But as I was recording my latest EP, I realized it still wasn't super efficient. I'll put a link up here if you want to check out the old setup. But essentially, I created something that made zero compromises on sound, vibe, or manual control. And after using it for a while, I discovered the same thing synth manufacturers discovered back in the 60s, which is that I wished I had a lot more normal connections. It was slow and difficult to tune the oscillators. What I really wanted was probably just a mini Moog that had a sound of its own. And that was when I got hit with a bitter pill to swallow. I actually had a Behringer Model D sitting in a box in my closet. I had bought it a couple years ago as a teaching instrument and hadn't really given it much attention because of the gross way Behringer seems to participate in capitalism. But I knew it sounded really good. I went and grabbed it, racked it up, and gave it a solid chance as a replacement for basically half of my system. And it actually won. I had really been missing the quality of life improvements of a semi-modular, like MIDI directly to actual sound, normal envelopes, octave switching oscillators, all in tune with each other, a modulation bus that you could just turn a knob to access. All the details of a full, incredible voice that I would typically skimp on in my modular patches were there, and it had all the vibe I could ask for too. Now maybe I could have just stopped there and called it a lesson learned the hard way, but this wasn't my first experience mixing a semi-modular with Eurorack. I had done the same thing with my Moog Matriarch and Korg MS-20, and ultimately decided that wasn't quite for me either. So I gave it some more time, and sure enough, I found myself gravitating towards my MS-20 over my modular again. So I hit the drawing board. I knew I didn't want to use many fundamental building blocks in this new system. Patching them up gets to be a pain pretty quickly. I also knew that I didn't want to go for an extended semi-modular setup because I'll always just wish it was my MS-20. The heart wants what the heart wants. But there were positive things from my old system I really wanted to keep around. Rings was one of them. It's an amazing physical modeling sound source and audio processor for external signals. You don't need VCAs or attenuators to modulate it. And it's still pretty difficult to tune. But it's definitely worth it. My Erica Synths Fusion mixer is another one that I was not about to let go of. This is my primary sound shaping module and the main reason my modular sounds like my modular. It starts saturating when the dials are above 12 o'clock and all the sound sources mix together and squish together a little more naturally and easily than with a clean mixer. So this is the special sauce, and there's no way I was going to do without it. Speaking of Erica, I hung on to my black joystick too, because it's 8 LFOs, a CV recorder, and you can attenuate the signal as you draw it in, so you don't need VCAs for that either. It's a quality of life improvement from fumbling around with traditional LFOs. I kept my output module because it's compact and works great. No complaints. I also kept my spring reverb module because it adds a great vintage flair. But other than that, everything else is different. Diving into the uniqueness factor. As a musician and all-around music lover, I've always gravitated towards natural sounds. What attracts me to synthesizers is really the musical puzzle environment more than the electronic sound. I think Modular is special because we get to create our own unique environment of musical puzzles to solve. Who knows what we'll find or what our tendencies will be? It's an introspective journey that isn't as self-centered as the way I typically write music, with a guitar, a piano, and my voice. There's more opportunity for creativity because I'm forced to rethink basic things I may have figured out 10 years ago, but I'm drawing the line at the sound generation level. I want my modular to sound more like an acoustic instrument than a traditional East Coast or West Coast synthesizer. To that point, I found the Cwejman Res-4. I believe the correct pronunciation is more like Cwejman. This is a quad voltage controlled resonator bank, which basically means it's 4 bandpass filters in parallel. This is the same thing that Rings does, except it's analog and there are only 4 bands instead of 60. The filters are very pingable at low bandwidths, and at higher bandwidths, they mimic the resonance of an acoustic space, like the body of an acoustic guitar, a room, or an amp cabinet. So it can be its own set of voices or an audio processing tool as well. This is the most expensive module I've ever bought, but it gets a 10 out of 10 from me. The build quality is superior, the knobs feel perfect, it looks great, and the sound of the filters is perfection. It sounds completely different than Rings, and as a sound processor, it's much more natural sounding. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the creator of this module based all of his filter designs on the classic Moog ladder filter, updating them to have smoother resonance control. These filters definitely sound smooth enough for me to believe it. All I can say is, to me, it's worth it. Let's check out the other sound sources. Rings and Res-4 are the primary melodic voices, but I've also included the Instruo Larachd, that may be mispronounced also, to accept external input from my electric piano. I love twisting knobs, but at some point, I have to jump in and start playing along. This is how I can do that. It also has an envelope follower, microphone, gate detector, and foot pedal input, giving me even more control over whatever audio signal I want to feed in. One really fun application of this is to play an acoustic instrument, like a drum, and have my modular listen in via the microphone and play along. Like, are you kidding me? That's so cool. You are the clock. I also have this module that was like $30, the Tesseract Modular Low Coast. This is literally just a car radio that's been slapped into a Eurorack module. It's awesome. I really like it through the Res-4. Maybe I'll jam along to the radio, but I cut out everything except the bass. Or I can play something from my phone over Bluetooth or USB. Or I could use it as an exciter for Rings. It can even take line level signals and amplify them to Eurorack level. I'll put affiliate links to this and the other modules I've mentioned in the description of the video. Check it out if you want to help support my channel. I think just about every rack could benefit from one of these. But I will say, having a radio antenna inside your modular case may give you noise issues. I had some noise problems that I solved by moving the antenna away from the busboard cables. So if you buy one of these and end up with noise issues, you might be able to solve it by putting the antenna in the right spot. This is the last official sound source, although I'm sure some of you can find another way to get bloops out of this thing. I have the Erica Synths X Moritz Klein DIY kick drum, which I built myself and love. There's something about DIY modules that makes them feel extra special, and this isn't the kind where you just spend an hour or two soldering and then it's done. It took me a really long time to get through this because you actually have to learn how the circuit works and pretend like you're a module designer iterating on a design. It's really cool. I actually have some more of their DIY series, but this is the only one that made it into the rack because I needed a kick. The circuit is based on the vintage 909 kick, which I found fascinating. I always assumed old drum machines made their sounds the same way I would do it on the front end. Some sort of oscillator with an amp envelope, pitch envelope, maybe a wave shaper, and a bunch of VCAs to connect everything. Nope. Turns out you can get most of that stuff for free if you just design the circuit intelligently. Very cool. And it sounds great too. Tons of analog character here. No two kick triggers sound quite alike. It's not quite as fine-tuned as some of the other modules in the rack, but it's meant to be like a drum. You bang on it and it goes boom. I think it's cool. This module is a little bit of a departure from the acoustic idea, but it fits in surprisingly well. Let me know in the comments if you have a favorite percussion module that you think might fit even better here. So that's it for sound sources. Next is modulation. Let's talk about Mutable Instruments marbles. I think of this as a 3-channel generative sequencer. It's complex but rewarding, and it's one of the 2 main reasons my modular can jam along with me. I programmed my module to play with a similar distribution of notes as I tend to play, so it comes up with ideas that I mostly like. Also, the Deja Vu knob controls how much of a previous sequence of notes will repeat, so it will slowly evolve and change ideas over time, or I can just reach for that Deja Vu knob and get an entirely new set of ideas to play with. The 3 channels are somewhat dependent on each other too, so musical things just happen. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this module because it gets intense really fast, but the depth is one of its strengths. To round out the Mutable collection, I have beads. This is the other main reason my modular can jam along with me. Beads, the successor to clouds, can act like a delay, granular processor, sampler, reverb, and everything in between. Basically, it takes whatever audio goes into it, chops it up into little pieces, rearranges them, and then plays it back. And it does it in all kinds of smart ways. It sounds really good in stereo, and the little knobs on the bottom allow you to add randomization to the parameters, or to attenuate or randomize incoming CV. No VCAs required. This module alone is super fun to play piano along to. The reverb is no joke either, even though it looks like it's an afterthought with just the tiny little trim pot. Let's take a quick listen. Lastly, we have some utilities. The MIDI CV converter is important to play the resonators with a keyboard or with Ableton Live, and the buffered mults and Unity mixer are used in pretty much every patch for some reason or another. Maybe it's effects routing, CV multing, or inverting logic from marbles. The Bubble Sound VCA 4P is an awesome quad VCA based on the ARP 2600 designs. I love it. It has great character, it doesn't take up much space, and it works as a voltage-controlled mixer. Bubble Sound is a tiny little company that genuinely cares about their customers, so I like that too. And then I have this little Triatt, which is just 3 attenuverters. Oh, and one more thing. It's my trusty SQ-1 sequencer. It doesn't technically live in my rack, but it's always nearby. There's a very distinct style of playing a sequencer that I associate with the Moog DFAM, where you have a repetitive sequence and almost excessive control over velocity. You can't recreate it in software because you need hands-on control of multiple knobs at once. It's another distinct style of improvising with a synthesizer that I'll never let go of because it's so much fun. And this sequencer is great at it. So that's my rebuilt Eurorack system. I think of it as an acoustic modeling Groovebox. It's still not the most practical thing for cranking out tracks, but refocusing it into something that I can just have fun with jamming has felt like the right choice so far. The uniqueness comes from the tube mixer, flexible physical modeling ethos, and the emphasis on interfacing with me and my real-world instruments. My wife has been enjoying listening to it too, which to me is the ultimate test of how long something really sticks around in my studio. Thanks for watching.